key issue was the dependency on the implementation of the OIC. So
Sorry,
things had to be decided, and in the context of this,
every department has
IT
an org
component
chart
would have
with
been through
titles
CBSA.
and with names. There's a lot of words going on, but like, who normally has the authority to decide to relax rules or processes?
With respect to the testing or the contracting?
The testing.
Yeah, the testing, we were providing CBSA with the advice of what we needed in the application, and then we're running the process.
Okay, so who would have the authority to suspend normal processes or relax rules?
I think it would have been done through the governance of the DGs and the ADMs at the time. We'd have to go back and take a look.
Okay, I'll move on. The 10,000 erroneous quarantine orders, was that a specific event? Like, was there one glitch that created all of that, or was that cumulatively over time, 10,000 wrongful quarantine notices were given out?
So that was a specific event that was identified on the 28th of June and resolved on the 20th of July. So it was a specific event in the app, an error that was identified, rectified, and then the Public Health Agency was involved in addressing that.
Okay, so it was one specific event. Did you brief the minister that this event happened?
I was not present at that time, so I can't actually speak to what briefing, but we can take that away.
Okay. Were the 10,000...
Sorry, I just, that's an open-ended. Are you going to get back to the committee when you say take it back? Is that you're implying you're going to come back to us with an answer on that if the minister was briefed? Because, Ms. Jeffrey, I will remind you that you're here representing PHAC, so I know the questions are you, but the committee hopes you're responding for PHAC. And I heard you say you'll come back to us. Are you going to provide us with an answer to that question?
So I'm not aware of what briefing was done at that time, but I take note of the request and I will go back to see if there's evidence of what briefing
Thank you.
took place
Then
at that
we
time.
will look for that answer. Appreciate it. Mr. Scheer, you still have 2 minutes left.
Have the 10,000 individuals been notified? The Canadians who are ordered, or the travelers who are ordered to quarantine, have they been notified that they were wrongfully ordered to quarantine?
Yes.
Okay. The decision to pursue a quote non-competitive approach in all of this, who made that decision?
That decision would have been taken by the Public Health Agency and to take advantage of the contracting vehicle that was set up by PSPC.
Yeah, individuals, though, like which individuals would have said, we're going to pursue this approach?
I'll turn to Martin for who signed the authority.
There would have been director generals and executive directors within our program branch.
We get names and titles?
I don't have those with me at the time, but I can endeavor
Get back to the committee on that. Okay. Was the minister briefed that a non-competitive approach would be taken on this issue?
The decision at the time was taken within the public service at the Director General. It was my recollection of the signature of that contract. It would not be normal practice to brief on the nature of how the operations were being implemented.
Okay. So having taken a non-competitive or sole source approach to just not have any kind of comparisons, not do any kind of shopping around to see if you can get a better price or a better product, who provided the oversight monitoring the invoices that were coming in from GC Strategies?
The Public Health Agency did not contract with GC Strategies. I thought you were referring to the KPMG contracts that were administered through the agency. So it would have been at CBSA.
At CBSA.
Yes.
Okay.
That we're monitoring those contracts related to the app development.
Okay. I think that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scheer. You have a few seconds left. You did ask for some other information, but I didn't at about the 1 minute mark. Can you just? I didn't. I do like to get an acknowledgement from witnesses. The
decision makers around the decision to pursue a non-competitive approach. We would like to know who made that decision.
All right.
On the KPMG.
Again, if you could make note of that request and provide an answer forthwith. Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Scheer. Turning out to Mr. Chen, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, we have heard today from PAC that in the initial meetings with CBSA in March 2020, there was a lack of formal governance. The AG's report says that no formal agreement existed between the two departments for the next 15 months. No designated lead, no project objectives and goals, no budgets, no cost estimates, no risk management activities. This to me is beyond comprehension. Section 1.63 of the AG's report, and I quote, a letter of intent between the agencies was signed in July 2021. That to me is 16 months late. In the real world, a letter of intent between two parties is what you start with. I'd like to hear from PAC on what took so long to get a letter of intent signed.
So I can say that the operationalization of the app was done collaboratively between the Public Health Agency and the Canadian Border Services Agency. As I mentioned, we were very focused on the need to stand up the app and to have it rolled out to allow the border to flow and to have the safe restarting of the economy, in addition to the flow of key people. There was a de facto management of the app going forward that was not defined, and that is not a best practice, as the Auditor General has pointed out, and steps have now been taken to rectify that going forward. The letter of intent was developed as the app was moving to move from the voluntary use space to the mandatory space, and that triggered a process to make sure that we had codified and documented the roles and responsibilities appropriately, which is a very detailed exercise that was then conducted. And we acknowledge, recognize, and take as a lesson learned that should be done at the outset of this development in future.
Section 1.70 of the Auditor General's report says, I quote, we found similar issues in the two professional services contracts awarded by the PAC to KPMG. While the first contract included milestones with clear deliverables and pricing, these were later amended and replaced with less specific deliverables. I'd like to hear from PAC. Why would you amend a contract that had clear deliverables and pricing to something that is less specific? That makes no sense to me. What is the rationale for doing that?
So I believe that the intent at the time was to ensure that we had enough flexibility to adapt the requirements to a virus that was changing very quickly and was requiring some expanded responses that we needed to use the services of KPMG to help deliver. As you'll recall, at the time the contracts were initially entered into, we were not sure how long the pandemic would last. We did not know if there would be waves, if those waves would be seasonal. We were monitoring the entry of new variants. And so initially, there was not an expectation, I think, on our part that we were entering into many years of successive responses, and that the responses were being built incrementally. So I think in terms of the need to ensure a continuity of high-quality services, the decision was taken to add some broader categories to the contract. So we take the Auditor General's finding and recommendation that is not a best practice, and that we should be as specific as possible to ensure value for money. But I do believe that the decision to create broader taskings was designed to allow for that agility and responsiveness in terms of the work that needed to be done.
So I'm confused. On the one hand, there are initially clear deliverables, and that is in the context of having milestones set out in the first contract. To me, milestones are broad goals of the work that needs to occur for the project. What you're saying is that the flexibility is needed because of the ever-changing needs arising out of the ever-changing pandemic. But the Auditor General continues on and says that, in addition, and I quote, the agency did not set out specific tasks, levels of effort, and deliverables for these contracts in task authorizations. So on the one hand, I'm hearing from you that there is an awareness of what's happening around the world, and therefore you are acting and modifying the contract to reflect the changing needs. But on the other hand, we're hearing that there's the agency did not set out specific tasks, levels of effort, and deliverables.
Thank you,
I'd
Mr.
like to
Chen.
hear
That is
from
your
the
time,
Auditor
but I will allow for an answer. But that is your time.
Can I hear from the Auditor General
Yes.
on
All
this?
right, sure.
Thank you.
Ms. Hogan, the question is for you, please.
So while I acknowledge that the Public Health Agency rightfully needed to make the overarching contract more flexible given the evolving nature, that's where task authorizations then become really important to pull down off of this broader contract when you're asking for something specific. That's when you should be specific with a level of effort, who should be doing it, and the skills that you need. And while creating flexibility in one area still means that you need to provide some specificity for good accountability in another.
Thank you very much. Turn now to Mr. Brock. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Since the release of the Auditor General report, all that we've heard from the Prime Minister and several ministers is that people need to take responsibility. They've essentially put up a firewall between the government and the federal public service, in particular the agencies that are under fire. Now, to you, Ms. Hogan, the Auditor General, was part of your mandate, did it require you to uncover or ask for documentation to show what level of communication existed between the Prime Minister's office, the PCO, and various ministers that we've heard of today, and their departments?
So our mandate really is to look at how the federal public service takes action once a decision has been made by a government. So in this case, the decision to enact certain border measures, and then how was that operationalized? In the course of doing an audit like that, we might often see briefing material or so on. In this case, because there was such thin documentation, I would tell you that we saw some emails where the Deputy Minister was being made aware of things at the Canada Border Services Agency, but we saw no formal approval from the deputy there or no formal briefing to ministers. So I can't really speak on what happened between a deputy minister and a minister.
Okay, and that certainly applies to PHAC as well, that description you just gave?
Yes, we looked for it more at Canada Border Service Agency because they were doing the main contracting
Correct.
and development, yes.
But also PHAC. So, Ms. Jeffrey, I understand you've been in the role as Deputy Minister and President for just 1 year. Your predecessor, who was that?
My predecessor was Dr. Harpreet Kokar.
Okay. And did you consult, for preparing for this particular committee hearing, did you consult with your predecessor on details surrounding the ArriveCAN?
No, I did not.
Okay. Was there a particular reason why you didn't?
Because the public servants who are responsible for the administration of this project and the rollout of the app continue to have functions in the department.
Sure, and ultimately you now as the Deputy Minister and President are responsible for the entire department.
Yes.
Right? So you're in a position to answer any and all questions.
Yes.
So going back to my earlier round about communications and the frequency, it sounds like the Minister Haidu in particular, the PCO, who ultimately reports to the Prime Minister, were in regular contact with your predecessor and other officials within your department. Now, what I'd like you to produce to us, to this committee, and I'm going to ask it within perhaps 15 days or longer if the chair deems it appropriate, I'd like a calendar or some type of scheduling that would have existed at the time your predecessor was communicating to both Minister Haidu and the PCO. I want to know that frequency. You've indicated that it was fairly frequent. Could have been phone calls, it could have been emails, it could have been actual meetings. I'd like you to produce a schedule of all of those events. Will you do that?
So there was formal governance around the policy of the border measures, and certainly we can document that. But the decisions around the contracting and the governance of
I'm
the
talking
app
about your
rested with the
communications.
public
You
service.
must have some type of system that documents when you're going to have a meeting with a minister. That's a pretty important event. You certainly don't just decide at a whim, I'm going to have a conversation, you don't document it. I'm asking for documentation to show the frequency of those meetings. To Minister